Northeast just got your share of the latest storm. Is it getting exciting yet this spring for anybody? Are you ready for summer? Couple thumbs up there. All right. We're taking NASAAEP on the road. We're going to Florida.
Do it.
Lots of applause there. Everybody, we're going to Florida. Forget it. Everybody put in for time off. We're out. All right, we're going to get going. Things are being recorded in case anybody misses this. As you guys know, Thompson, I am current president for NASAAEP. Today's going to be a little bit different spin on things. We've got Dr. Jimmy Tickle. Many of you know Jimmy already, but he's a veterinarian working for Texas A&M AgriLife Research for the Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases. And Jimmy has really got the international spin going on for today's presentation. But what's interesting is, even though we're going to be talking about international approaches, it is very applicable here in the U.S. and what's been going on. And as part of Jimmy's presentation, he's going to be showing us a systems approach to preparedness for our disasters, which, again, gives us a little bit different perspective to consider as we're working in our regions and in our states. So I'm not going to dabble too much more. I will let you know next month we're going to be focusing on large animal events and disasters in states and what we can be doing to be building our technical large animal resources along with some of our other large animal sheltering resources within the states. And then if you guys have some hot topics you want us to look into and get some speakers working for those topics, go ahead and put it in chat today, and we'll get that working in some of our committees to get that added to some of our monthly call lists. So you can feel free to put stuff in the chat. Jimmy, are you on? Can you hear me? Are you ready to go?
I am, Eric. Can you hear me?
I can. You sound great.
Fantastic. Here's what I'll do. I'll start my video and say hey to everyone. Let's see if that comes up.
It did.
What kind of, can you see my video? Okay, Mindy sees me, so I'm going to wave to you. Then what I'm going to do, and you see aging in real time. I mean, you guys are experiencing the same thing. We work so hard that we age overnight. So what I'm going to do now is stop my video and see if I can't go ahead and share screen. And let's see if this works. Let me know when you can see my screen. In slideshow mode.
We can.
Okay, let's see if we can go slideshow mode. Let me see. Interesting. Now maybe I can do it. Okay, is it in slide presentation mode?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, let's go ahead and start. And guys, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to apologize straight up that we do not have a very fancy slideshow for you on the exercise. The title of it was Phoenix. And the exercise was extraordinary, to say the least. It's a internationally based exercise. It's held in 3 regional hubs. So more about that. It was begun, the planning phases were begun pre-COVID. COVID interfered with an awful lot of things, even from the planning of it to the prep sessions that would help countries become ready for the exercise. And then we actually saw COVID break in some of the exercise locations as we were doing the exercise. So it's kind of fascinating to have been involved in it. The lead organizations on an international level, of course, FAO, Interpol, and WOA, or formerly known as OIE. Now, some of you that are involved in animal regulatory, especially on the livestock side of things for your state government or industry, are perceiving OIE as, wow, I thought they only did diseases. And now you start to find out that WOA is becoming much more heavily involved in emergency management, even for natural disasters. And one of the things that you'll see at the end of this, as we go end up after our exercise presentation, is a module that WOA has worked with IAD, so the Institute for Infectious Animal Diseases at Texas A&M, who I work for, to produce an emergency management module. So just kind of want to show you a little bit of what's going on internationally. Let's get into our exercise. And you guys can, I think I can see a hand raised, or Eric, you can let me know if you see one. Mine's in full presentation mode on my screen, so I might be a little bit limited. But what we can do is maybe hold questions.
No problem. We'll watch it.
Okay. Let's go to how it came to be and what the exercise is trying to address. And it's fun. It's supported by the actually through Global Affairs of Canada, and they have a weapons threat reduction program. So they had funding that they wanted to invest. It gets a little bit interesting to know that Canada nor the U.S. were involved as a player in the exercise. You'll see eventually who the countries were that were chosen to participate. But their mantra, their marching orders, building sustainable global resilience against animal health emergencies caused by agro-terrorism and agro-crime. This exercise focused on agro-terrorism. I think the more probable and maybe more interesting and potentially maybe have already occurred event is agro-crime. But they have some similarities, but also some differences. The terrorism component actually looking to do political work and influence people because of ideology and other goals or intent. And then agro-crime would be perhaps for economic or market gains, things like that. So even for vengeance or other types intents. So when we look at the overall exercise objectives, there were 5. You can see that these are very high level. It was to raise awareness of, confirm triggers of suspicion of an agro-terrorism act at a national or regional level, then to start to get into maybe some of the working pieces of it, how to discuss or how to initiate a joint response to a suspicion. So how do we assess and then move into an initial response measures? You're going to see a slide later on that shows some of what I call the activities or the working pieces of the exercise that countries could then develop into agro-terrorism plans. So the other piece was to understand how to practice, maybe even develop. I think develop in some regions was really the target. Collaboration and cooperation between law enforcement, veterinary services at the national and regional level. So when I say national, think country, so it would be U.S. and then regional. We would think our tripartite partners. We would think maybe Canada and Mexico and the U.S., for example. So that's kind of how these regions work. And then also to start thinking about information sharing and how that would work on each of the levels. So how VS and law enforcement would share information at the national level, at the country level, as lead agencies of an agro-terrorism event, and then also at the regional level and then international level. The interesting thing about this exercise was it had 12 countries playing, and each country initially started the exercise as though they were the only country impacted, when in actuality, all of them were. So all 12 countries got to play positive, but what they didn't understand was that they thought they were the single country. in play. They didn't know what the other countries were doing. Now, there's a little bit of artificiality there in that each region had 4 countries playing. So they kind of could look across the room and see, hey, I think they're doing the same stuff we're doing. But in some sense of it, it was kind of interesting that the 4 countries in each region were involved in a plot, and in this terrorism plot that would eventually involve all of them to be affected by the act itself. Then the other thing that the exercise intended to do is to start also thinking about the roles, especially on the, from VS and law enforcement on the national and regional, but also how other international organizations, specifically Interpol, WOA, and FAO, could also have some role or responsibility in an international agro-terrorism event. So let's look at how it was laid out. And I told you these were going to be very basic slides. And you're like, well, Jimmy, don't you know how to make a PowerPoint? Yeah, I kind of do. But here's the thing. The exercise is actually going to have an official presentation done at the Global Emergency Management Conference being held in Paris the first week of April. So there's no way I can steal that thunder and just put together this really fancy PowerPoint or use the one they're going to use there. So I've actually just created kind of a straw man version that we can share. And you say, well, why don't you just wait till you did that one? Or you could have, just shared that one. And I said, well, you guys may hear about this, and having some background to it, it'll be interesting for you to be able to put things together, especially when you see my recommendation at the very end. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag quite yet. But what I'd like to do is share this with you, and then any other news that you hear, you'll say, oh, I heard about that. And you'll be able to put the 2 pieces together. So very basic PowerPoint. In this slide, we're showing that there were regional exercises, and it was a whole week worth. They were done the week of Valentine's Day. 4 days worth of exercises. You can see the 3 regions: North Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia. You can see the countries: Tunisia, Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria for North Africa, and Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt for the Middle East. And then for Southeast Asia, that's the hub I was in. Thailand was the host, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. So the way this worked was that these 3 regions would actually engage in the exercise simultaneously, although they did it in 3 time zones. Okay, so you should be going, oh, wow, your first question should be, talk to me about the sim sale. And that was the headquarters in Rome. And so it was a fascinating situation to where Southeast Asia led, because we're in the initial time zone. Then the same exercise was conducted in Middle East and North Africa, just in different time zones, with headquarters trying to track all 3, thus meaning very long days for them. So they had to run double shifts to get that accomplished. The 4 days worth of exercises in the regional hubs basically put together veterinary service and law enforcement. Now, another artificiality is they understood that if it was a international, high-level agro-terrorism event that could involve this number of countries, you would have other players: emergency management, you'd have public health, and a number of others. Wildlife would likely be involved. So other agencies would be involved. But since veterinary services and law enforcement are lead agencies for such an event, that's the focus. If we can't get law enforcement, veterinary services working together, then things are not going to go well from the very start. Now, here's a thing that you learn. So when I started to do it, and hey, I am not an international arena expert by any means, and so I'm having to learn an awful lot. It's like a fire hose drinking experience. So my first experience came when the term veterinary services was used. I actually thought that was USDA. And I thought, oh, okay, so they're talking about their country's version of USDA. That's not it at all. Veterinary services, when you go internationally, means everybody from a private practitioner all the way up into the lead veterinarian for the country, the CVO, central veterinary officer. So when something like that, and you're like, well, what's the difference? Why is it that way in the U.S.? And that is in most other countries, private practitioners, especially a good number of them, maybe not all, they also play a role in food safety, food security, in the sense of actually working some part of their time for the government. So they may do meat inspections. So private practitioners actually engaged in food security, and then other regulatory programs all the way up. We don't do that in the U.S. It's not quite like that at all. Closest we come to is accredited veterinarians writing health certificates and may be involved in disease reporting. So it's a whole different field when you start talking about veterinary services internationally. Then when you start talking about, well, let me finish this up before I go to the next slide, and that is I have to talk about that there was an International Exercise Day held as well. That was February the 28th, and that one concentrated on Interpol, WOA, and FAO working with the deliverables and the information provided by these regional exercises to understand what their roles would be from an international perspective. So we'll talk more about that. So you had two different exercises, and in big picture, with one exercise actually having 3 hubs in play, performing the same, working with the same scenario, same deliverables, same objectives, just doing it in 3 different locations. Yeah. So let's go to what the details were. Boy, what an exquisite scenario. I mean, hey guys, I'll be honest with you. I'm one of those that, and people do exercises differently. I like a scenario to where my imagination can run wild. I don't like a scenario that puts borders around me and tries to limit the action. I can go, worst case scenario, best case scenario. I like to kind of do that and then play it that way. But this one, the scenario actually entailed a student that was recruited out of college, a scientist recruited to actually steal an organism, and we'll just leave it there. I won't even go into what it is. Again, not trying to steal some thunder, but it was an organism that should not be in people's hands. This student was encouraged by a group looking to make political hay out of the climate change and some of the environmental impacts thereof. And so this student was engaged to take the agent. This is an agent that would make anybody in the animal disease response world take note immediately. This agent was actually put into transport using criminal elements and other networks, such that through a number of different ways, it actually arrived in country to where it would be put in play again, all 12 of those countries, to be put out or sprayed actually through the use of drones. So the agent was introduced by the use of drones. So the interesting thing about the scenario was that it would engage, since it's going to go on farms, it would engage BS, but since there was other intel and information out there that law enforcement could glean from their sources, they could be engaged pre-deployment of the agent or delivery of the agent to the animals. Everybody could be involved. So we could build a backstory to the exercise. And again, it's quite elaborate, especially for law enforcement. We had, as far as if you ask, okay, who on the U.S. side of this thing was even involved? The U.S. wasn't a player. We were involved in a number of different ways. One is Dylan Mazzolini and someone that you all know, Stephen Goldsmith, were heavily involved through FBI, engaged in development of the scenario and injects, and also in evaluation and facilitation of the exercise. Okay? So I wasn't in Stephen's hub, but he was a key player in one of the other hubs working with law enforcement. Dylan was actually in our hub as an evaluator in Southeast Asia. So, so the scenario was quite expansive in the sense that it involved a lot of different pieces. It allowed us to produce some really cool injects. The injects were delivered through a simulation software package. And one of the things that we didn't want to do is to release this information out to the public. The scenario was so expansive and so broad that you didn't want to get it out there and let people get their hands on it. And so even the injects, when they were delivered, it was not to be on paper. We did have some contingency plans, and it came into play in one of the hubs to where they had to be printed. But to just let you understand kind of not that I'll call it security level, but the sensitivity that we had, there were actually shredders at each of the hubs, so that any paper copies of the injects and such would be shredded at the end of the day. So that's kind of the how in depth the scenario and the injects went. The injects were customized to each country. So Mauritania was actually looking at a farm profile that was built and submitted on behalf of their country, so that it seemed real to them. In fact, one of the really complimentary observations and evaluations from the players were they're like, wow, this thing kind of seemed real to us. And they got into it when they did their report outs and their briefings. It actually did have that real feel to it. So it kind of changed my mind about scenarios that, okay, if you're going to do one to that extent, yeah, I really saw the value of it. The injects were the same for each. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. One of the questions that we had relevant to that, do you know what type of simulation software they used?
I could get it for you. It was international. It wasn't one that I was familiar with. Here's the thing, though. It was very basic. You could actually create the same, thanks for asking that question. You could create the same situation by using Teams or another and just posting it. So the injects basically were like media releases, and we created them. I mean, I actually went online and I helped create them. Pam Hollinger was another person from the U.S. that you would know. Sharon Stewart was involved as a contractor for IAD and helping to produce some of the guides and such. But we actually would produce these injects by ProMed, for example. We would take the letterhead and actually create it and word it just as though you would see as a ProMed release or request for information and such as that. So there were media, there were reports that were from the labs or from investigation reports. So, and then the third would be other type of information that would come in that you can imagine what it would be, but more specific to something intel for law enforcement, or that someone would send us a note. There was a letter of intent that the perpetrator actually, so the terrorism group sent to officials. So we had all of those, for example, and but you could post them anywhere on a site and let people have access to them, but not allow them to copy it off and such. So the software was pretty cool. We didn't get to use a tenth of what the software could do, because basically what we really wanted to do with it was to just keep in hand the information, the injects. So, but if you were going to go ahead and do it's a great idea, and we've done it when we did the vaccine workshops a couple of years ago. Last year, we used something similar in that software program. So there's different ones out there, but if you wanted to build one on your own, I think you could do what we did, just to present it in such that people could have them in folders, or if they just had it on the screen and they could access them, pull them up, drop them down, pull them up, drop them down. So nothing super fancy there. One of the things that I was talking about, that the index being customized to country, they were all the same though. And so all of the countries at each hub, now this is respective of the hubs, they're in 3 different time zones, but all of the 4 countries in each of the 3 hubs were working simultaneously on the same index in the same session. So the exercise broken up in sessions, and those index were delivered. Okay. If you ask, okay, how was it conducted? There's a couple of different things that worked quite well. So this was all in person. There were no virtual players to this. If players wanted to reach out and do the call a friend, that was a little bit scary for us, because we didn't really want that to happen. If it did, we controlled it quite tightly. And that not only did you have to say this is an exercise, but you could only reach out to official members of your government or agency. When we started to do the conduct of the exercise, the way each hub of the 3 hubs worked was there were exercise controller, Pam Hullinger, for example, was exercise controller in Southeast Asia. There was a lead facilitator, us the lead facilitator in Southeast Asia. Then there would be a law enforcement facilitator to work with law enforcement teams. And then there would be veterinary services facilitator to work with the veterinary teams. There were also evaluators, a law enforcement and veterinary services evaluator for each hub. Then there were also FAO representatives and others, not a lot of observers, no media, although there were pictures taking, and that was a contracted crew that came in and did that. There were some participants there for law enforcement that did not want their pictures taken. And so they actually had stickers and were identified to the contract photographers so that they would not be part of any documentation with regard to photos and video. So something that was quite interesting, like, wow, okay, talk to me about a hub. How did a regional hub work with 4 different countries, 2 player teams for each country? And the way it worked was that there were times when you just wanted veterinary services to engage a topic in their own lane. So it's how would veterinary services do something? And then also law enforcement to do the same. For example, even recognition that there is a potential event, an agro-terrorism event. That would be recognized in a veterinary services lane, but it would be recognized in a different but complementary law enforcement lane. So there were times that we used 3 rooms. We'd have a veterinary services room, a law enforcement room, and a plenary room. Plenary rooms, we got everybody together, gave them their marching orders, sent them to their respective agency rooms. And so for example, the exercise started off with veterinary services and law enforcement, all 4 countries in one room. So they're sitting at their own individual tables. The numbers of participants ranged. There often was somewhere around 5 to 7 veterinary services participants for each country, and anywhere from 1 to 3. Some countries had up to 5 law enforcement. So law enforcement teams were a little bit smaller. So you had each country. So Morocco had a veterinary services team, and Morocco had a law enforcement team. And so to start the exercise, to be in their separate lanes, Morocco had a VS team in one room and a law enforcement room in the other. Those teams were accompanied by the other countries, and they worked independently, receiving their index to the table, and then working through, oh, wow, there seems to be a situation on farm, law enforcement, there seems to be chatter, there seems to be intel. So they're working the discovery piece of the agro-terrorism incident. And then as it developed, as the exercise developed and advanced, of course, we wanted VS and law enforcement to work together. So there were times that then we would use our room configurations to put 2 countries in one room, 2 countries in the other room, and allow their veterinary service and law enforcement teams to work together. So again, they're not crossing over country to country. Initially in the first really 3 days, they're working country specific veterinary services independently or veterinary services and law enforcement together. Okay? So that'll make a little more sense when we go to the next slide. Some of the things that when you're working with different countries, some of you guys are probably thinking, wow, what do you do with interpreters? What do you do with different languages? That got to be pretty fascinating in the fact that just as, well, I'll give an example. North Africa had 3 different languages in play: Arabic, French, and some English. They actually used French as their dominant language, and then also some Arabic. One of the things that that we did to make sure that there were plenty of interpreters there was we actually included a lot of the people when you get up to the controllers, facilitators, and evaluators. We made sure that they actually could speak both Arabic and French, or had components of both in the room, so that conversations could be had. I'll give you an example of a challenge. So in Southeast Asia, we were working English, and all of the participants actually could use English and use it fluently. They could write it. So the interesting thing was when they wanted to work in their groups, we found that they wanted to work in their own languages, and they could go at warp speed. But what we wanted to do is to track the exercise, and I only speak English. So how did we do that? So one of the things that we did is we used whiteboards, and the way we used our player guides would that if there were activities for them to accomplish, we would list those out, and they would be standardized, in a list, so that when they used the whiteboards, and they would use those to document their progress on the different itemized activities they were supposed to do for that session, and they would write it in English, so we could actually track how quickly they were moving through the session. But also when they reported out, they would report out in English, and then that helped us with documentation evaluation. One of the things that we used specifically in Southeast Asia, and they also used them in Middle East, but not so much in North Africa, were sticky notes. And we would use those to allow people to feel free to express ideas. Sometimes when you work with international, in countries internationally, they have an order, a command order, and subordinates will not share ideas freely, but with sticky notes, they actually could. And so that was an end around to have more involvement. People started to get quite fascinating in the way that they used the whiteboards and the sticky notes, to where they were going 3 deep. It was almost like an Excel spreadsheet, to where they could color code and organize the sticky notes on the whiteboards with their presentations. Got me pretty fascinated how creative they got. And they led one another. So as one country did something and they reported out, the other country saw it, liked it, they took it, and then took it another level. Here's the key activities, and this is important for us when we start thinking about, wow, what about, where are we at when we look at it in the States and compared to these others? Southeast Asia had not had any training. They came in cold turkey, straight up. They were meeting their law enforcement, VS was meeting their law enforcement folks, sometimes for the first time in a different country. So that was pretty fascinating. So, you had to kind of go high level here, but one of the things that we did is you walk through these points, and I know you're reading them as I speak, you start to notice that there's a pattern. It kind of almost looks like a template that you could use for a agro-terrorism plan, and that's what I think it to be. First, there has to be steps of discovery and reporting. How would that occur? Then your protocols for those. Even you could have reporting templates, international agency situation analysis. So, I'm sorry, internal agency. So, VS had to do a situation analysis. Law enforcement had to do one too of what they knew. Is this what is this? What do we see it? What do we think it is? And with the thought in the back of your mind that it could be agro-terrorism, then there needed to be the determination for the need of a national level joint threat assessment. So once the agencies thought, wow, this looks like this could be agro-terrorism, who else do we need to involve? Immediately, law enforcement and veterinary services knew they needed to work together. And then once each agency determined that they would like a joint threat assessment with their partner agency, they had to make that call and then conduct that national, so country level joint threat assessment. So the different sessions actually mirror these bullets of what the activities were through the different days of the exercise. Then there would to be a decision to activate a joint agro-terrorism response with the VS and law enforcement in the as lead agencies in the command portion of that. So that would be at the national level. Now you see the stars. We identified triggers, and that's the use of some sticky notes. And that was really cool for them to report out and then compare and notice the similarities between countries. So that was pretty cool. Then the other thing was we discussed agency roles and responsibilities. So before they actually conducted their joint agro-terrorism response, they had to define agency roles. So we pulled them back out again, VS, law enforcement, country-specific roles and responsibilities. Then we let them share them. So we put law enforcement, VS back together, let them share those roles and responsibilities. And then we allowed them to have at it. We put that country's law enforcement and VS together and said, okay, go. And they actually had to conduct their initial meetings and put together how they would do joint response, and even how in their country's organizational command structures, they would put this in knowing that it's also a transboundary, or we call them foreign animal disease event. The other thing that they did is we pulled them back out after all of that and let them talk about how they would do information media sharing. Okay, so that's pretty much at the national level what happened. At the regional level, and on day 3, we said, okay, everything that you just did, let's talk about how we do it at the regional level, understanding that, surprise, every country in the room is affected, impacted, has a terrorism event perpetrated on them. So all of those activities were discussed, and potential resource sharing was pretty fascinating. Countries actually wanted to kind of go there, see what they had. We kind of did, if you go back to the old Mars, we did the list 3 things that you could share, list 3 needs that you know you would need. So back in the early days of those exercises, we actually did that. Southeast Asia worked quite well. Then there was also on day 4 in the regional hubs, a discussion of how international organizations could assist them. Okay. Now, at the international level, especially at the February 28th international exercise day, that international organizations were the focus. They actually used the information from the regional exercises to then capitalize on the discussions between those key agencies, Interpol, WOA, and FAO, and other agencies as well, of what could be roles and responsibilities, any protocols that could be applied. There's some that are out there, and I'll leave it at that. Just international protocols that have been proposed for this. Some of them are kind of behind the curtain, so to speak. And then organizational considerations at international level, especially with regard to resource coordination and such. Okay, so here's my takeaways in the last slide for the international exercise. Boy, scenario is fantastic. So when you're doing agro-terrorism one, that may be the exercise to go ahead and go full out on scenario and index. For us, it was an incredible amount of work. We had to duplicate but customize index for 12 different countries. The scenario stayed the same. I think you should start as a goal to do a template. So if those countries walk through those activities lists that we just shared, they actually can start to develop an agro-terrorism plan template. If we did it in the States, we could actually standardize how each state would go about an agro-terrorism investigation so that we could understand if a perpetrator had attacked, say, for example, an industry that had a footprint in multiple states. And that would be a very highly likely scenario to occur in the U.S. is that multiple states would be involved in the perpetration of the event. Okay? And then when we get into this, folks, for me, I think we've got to cross-train our FADDs and those who will be initiating inspections on the VS side, so on our agricultural side. And the reason is that we are most likely the first on scene and maybe so for the first few days of the incident. And so what we really need to be doing is just like when we talk about FMD outbreaks, we think, wow, I wonder if this was intentional. We've not had it since 1929. Okay, yeah, I know globalism and all that, but we need to teach our veterinarians that work on large animal, and especially company or large facilities, what agro-terrorism, agro-crime could look like so that they could start the process of scene preservation and chain of custody. I mean, one of the things we had as an inject was that the regional veterinary officer actually was starting depopulation on the premises when law enforcement wanted to come in and look at a crashed drone site. So you can imagine the conundrum that can go there. And then also chain of custody. There's other things like biosecurity trainings for law enforcement if they were to enter the scene that our veterinarians could understand and be trained the trainers and such. So those are some take homes for me. Should we do a national agro-terrorism exercise in U.S. to standardize our approach across states and especially across industries? Yes. I think that's what we should do. Okay, so one of my little take homes and homework, and every time you come home from an exercise, you got stuff to do, is I'm actually going to try to write up a proposal for such and see where it goes. Okay, now let's do a quick, any questions quickly about that, knowing that we've got a few more slides that I want to show you on this, and this may be something that a lot of you guys think is even more fun than the international agro-terrorism exercise. But I don't want to slight that. Any questions, Eric, that you can see or from our participants?
We're good to go.
Okay, and you can write one in and we can come back to it. So also in the international front, I told you that WOA, a World Organization for Animal Health, has really become interested in promoting emergency management and the advancement of animal welfare in large-scale natural and disease disasters. So everybody's starting to really recognize what we are about in NASAAEP, and that is emergency management for animals and agriculture. So I thought I'd share this with you. WOA is actually working to develop training. There are fantastic trainings out there, gang. We think we've got all end to training and are quite advanced in the US. You bounce out there and you find some stuff internationally, like, wow, that's quite good. EUFMD, for example, has got some fantastic stuff out there. WOA's developing some as well. And so I'm participating. Gary Bogendewey's involved, Gary Flory, some folks that you guys have heard of and know are involved in creating some e-modules. So these are modules that would be used in training for emergency management. The modules that we are working on, those that I just mentioned, Gary and Gary. It's fascinating to be on a project with two Garys and you're on an international project. How often does that happen? And so one of the things that we're working on there is different levels of veterinarians. So veterinarians that are new to emergency management, they're trying to understand, some of the things that we train in the U.S. would be, ICS or the emergency management cycle. What is a threat assessment? What is how does risk relate to it? Where do impacts come in and such? And then my module actually tries to advance and produce, or not produce, but share more complex or advanced emergency management perspectives. And so let me share this one with you. It's pretty cool. I think I picked it up by working in the States. And the way it works is this. It's a systems approach. The way you guys that you work for agriculture, you actually do this if you actually have to activate and answer to all the things that your Department of Agriculture puts out. You're in North Carolina where we have to answer for the whole department. And it's everything from crop damage assessments to what just happened to a dairy cow. So we kind of get that systems thing, but this is more specific. So what we want to do is when we start our planning perspective, and I want you to think of this as being a training module, there are slides in front of it that talk about all hazards response and how to identify from threats and risks that you think are important to your country, how to identify the impacts. And once we get to those impacts, now and we're headed to capabilities, response solutions, things that we're actually going to do to fix stuff. So once you get to that point, you're to all hazards. And then what we should start to do is apply that approach using a systems perspective. Look at the dairy value chain. The fascinating thing here, and I don't know if you see my cursor, but when we start to look at the value chain, it entails a One Health perspective as well. Look, we've got human, so that's the owner. We got dairy, cattle, that's animal health. And then when you get to the farm, on the fourth node, you actually get the environment. So that's pretty fascinating to see. More important for our presentation and for us understanding the systems perspective, though, and using that approach is we want to understand the nodes. Now, if we just use the dairy value chain and go, hey, let's talk about COVID. Okay, COVID processing got hit because of public health restrictions on personnel, on staff at processing. That actually happened most in animal processing versus dairy plants. But what that did is that actually moved backwards. It cascaded towards the left. It started to impact the farm. We dumped milk. That impacted the environment, so it moved over to the farm itself. It impacted animals as their value in production became less. Then it capitulated and went to the markets as people did not go to restaurants and they did not go to school. And so we had to package milk differently, and that was a problem, so that it impacted the consumer, and then the consumer back on the markets, back on the dairies and farms themselves, and what was happening at the plant. Transport, supply chain. So you can see just from COVID how a system can become impacted quite readily. So how do we deal with this? Now, some of you are like, I don't deal in dairies. I actually deal in just companion animals. Well, hey, we can do it with an animal care network. We don't call it a value chain, but look at how dogs and cats run. And you can see key nodes there. And we know that in natural disasters, shelters can be affected. Personnel that work at shelters can be affected. Veterinarians can be put out of business, as we saw in Mississippi in Hurricane Katrina. We can see that owners and pets can be quite impacted as well. Feed and water, even the production of it, so feed production as well as what's on hand in retail can be affected. So we can start to define nodes. You can define them any way you'd like for your own state. but the more we standardize such an approach, the better we can use it. So let's look at the animal care network system as an example. What we're trying to do overall is we want to have identified our impacts for each node. And so we understand how veterinarians can be impacted. And if they're impacted, that's a critical function in our response, and we have to account for that. Some people would call these contingency plans. I think we need to go more in depth and actually develop node-specific planning. Where we're trying to get to is what are the response solutions or capabilities. These are activities that will address these impacts at each node. And then when we start doing that, it gets to be interesting to see which partners show up. I mean, who's in the business of the activities that we've proposed as responses? So let's go a little deeper. Here's our impacts. Just examples, you know, hey, this could have happened, that could have happened. Notice that the injury to the owner, that treatment is not the same as the injury to the pet. So we have different players involved there. But this is just impacts, things that we can think of that might affect this system, specifically at each node. Once we've done those, now we've abbreviated them. We've moved our impacts up into the orange. Now we're going to start thinking about our examples of response activities. We're going to start proposing, what do we need? Well, if they're displaced, we need search and rescue. Okay, damaged feed. Okay, now we need donations to replace, and we need a distribution process for that. Damaged businesses. Oh, veterinary clinics are damaged. Does FEMA fix those? No, but wow, veterinary medical associations on the state and national level sure work with veterinary clinics to help them to get supplies that were damaged or needed and such as that. So we start to propose our solutions, and then that's going to lead us to, hey, I wonder what level that response occurs at, or resource coordination, and then who are the people that actually do that. So you can see where I'm going with people trying to understand internationally how to develop some of their response plans and then actually apply a systems approach. So I'm kind of doing that with you on this call as well. So then we bounce down here and you start to see me do this generically. Okay. I do get kind of specific there in the veterinary care when I start naming, national veterinary, so AVMA, pharmaceutical companies, equipment companies. We've used all of those in North Carolina to help veterinarians get back on their feet. And that actually happens in kind of a business EOC fashion. You guys have seen that with emergency management. Or if it's your SART, your state animal response team, and you've got supporting agencies or organizations that could come in and assist impacted, and then you put it out there as to what they may be assisting. It usually is in a lane. It usually kind of fits. You won't find the state veterinary association, for example, trying to work to put a dairy processor back into play. Okay, so there's that. Let's go to another level. I'm going to use the dairy one for this, just to show you that it can be done on all of them. You can kind of look at some of the things that we're talking about with impacts or potential response solutions in yellow. And then you can see that we start to lay it out where that's happening locally. In SN, subnational, that's their international word for state in our situation, state, national. The local, state, national, we could do tribal and territorial in there as well. So we throw those guys in there, and now you're starting to see that we're identifying a little bit more specific who might be the go-tos to help us bring resolution or to coordinate some of the response, such as that. Okay. So that's kind of an approach to it. One of the pluses as I get to the end of this is that why stop at just response? What if we can bring this on the front end of things? And just as we start to work with those people, so the people in the blue, so these folks here, the light blue, everyone that we've identified there, why can't we include them that they also have an assessment role? So just before the event, they could provide their status works quite well, and we understand it, especially when we start talking about the shelter node. When we start asking people, hey, what capacity is your shelter at right now? Is it full? Are you going to move animals out before the storm arrives? What is the status of the adoption program? So that node, veterinarians, are you ready to roll? What's your staffing so that we know how you can participate with shelter health and taking care of injured animals? What's our donations programs look like? So we get that. That's pretty cool. And then at time of event, we can train them just in the same way that we're training them to participate with us as response partners. We can train them to also provide us a just after or post-event damage assessment report so that we know what our starting point is for our response efforts. And we could do that at all levels, whether it be at the response level at a county level for all the different partners, or whether we would do it at a state level for our resource coordination partners. So essentially, you could take the systems approach and apply it to the county level. And then for a resource coordination level, you could do it at the state as well. You could also do it at a national level if you wanted to go and work it there. So that's kind of one of the things that we're doing to share. And again, these are some of the points when we talk about assessment, some of the marching orders or the action pieces of assessing and then reporting. So the who and how and what does a report look like, what method and such. Okay, rather than just relying so much on hotlines and social media and all that other stuff, we can organize our assessing a bit better, but organize it from a systems level. I think it's quite interesting. That becomes, if we do the dairy one again, if you don't know what processing is doing and you're over here trying to take care of the cattle, yeah, it's great that all of them are fine and they're fed, but where's the milk going to go if you don't have power restoration at processing and have that before emergency management so that they understand how important that is, or power to feed mills, or transport to farms, that roads are clear and such. So all of that starts to impact animal welfare in a huge way, so that we can't concentrate on just what happened at the farm, but we have to look all up and down the node as well. Okay, Eric, I'm all talked out. I know everybody else is a little bit tired of listening to me. Any questions?
Yeah, you did a great job. Here's one that just came in. What is the communication channel / command between identified support partners with the systems approach to avoid siloing and improve response?
Yeah, and so when you start looking at your state animal response team concept, that already brought in your partner. So this is nothing new. The way that emergency management does it is a great proven model, and that is that they have all of their state agencies. These state agencies relate to agencies and organizations that help them in their lanes, fire, for example, law enforcement, agriculture, public health. So when we start to organize ours on behalf of animals, we should have representatives that if they just show up, it's 90% of response is having someone that you can get your hands on that can have an answer or know people that can bring some resolution to the impact. So if we look at this dairy one here, an example is that you are working with owners through your dairy agencies, through hotlines and through reports that would come in. You're understanding how the cattle are doing. You actually have a feed representative, someone who knows dairy feeding. It could come out of the university. It could come out of industry. You have, for veterinary care, you have your Veterinary Medical Association representative. We have one in North Carolina that sits in our Ag EOC, and that we can go to Claire and ask her, hey, how are the dairy vets doing? Have you heard anything out of this? Of course, company swine vets, you can have your own reach out to them and understand how they're doing, what their concerns are, what's happening. You could have someone that does transport that actually understands it for the dairy industry. We actually work with one of those, and another place that you can get that is through cooperative extension. So having an extension agent in Cattlemen's Association, Dairy Association, they'll understand what's happening in the transport node. Processing plant representative that would track and assess each of the dairy plants and understand what their power and water situations are and their ability to go online. And then also you can have a markets representative. So having all of those, if we did that emergency management style, they'd call it a business EOC. We don't set up a separate business EOC. When we roll it in North Carolina, what we would do is just have those representatives to where we could contact them in some shape or form so that we could actually understand where they were and what they needed. Then what you do is anytime you ask someone, you always say, how are you doing? If they say we're doing pretty good, then you say, well, good, here's how you can help. You turn anyone that's not a victim into a potential responder, and then you see what they can bring to the show. Quick example, when we asked swine industry, how you guys doing on farm? We're doing pretty good. We can't get feed to our farms because the roads are out, not bridges, but roads. So what we did is we actually worked, Commissioner of Agriculture, Troxler did a fantastic job working our research stations, which are government, in partnership with industry and National Guard and other DOT inspectors to patch roads, not fix bridges and such as that, gravel patch roads so that deliveries could be made to farms so that animals wouldn't go without feed. So that's a way that, you know, that business EOC, private-public partnership can work, but you got to have access to those people and understand what their challenges are, and then get them to propose their own solutions. If you agree with them, if command agrees with them, if it agrees to policy and position of what is happening from emergency management in your Department of Ag and others, and then see if you can put it in play.
Hey, Jimmy, one more question here, and it's more regarding additional training going forward. Kathy had asked whether there was any chance for the Center of Domestic Preparedness ever bringing back the Ag ERT class, or you know of anything similar where people can get more information on this?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things, you know, that might be a thing that we could do on one of these calls. Eric, is to bring Barb Porter Spalding in with the National Training Exercise Program for USDA, people like yourself out of NARS, people like ourselves out of NASAAEP, out of state level, university level, and actually have almost a forum to where people could ask those type questions and we could get. I think Mark Whitrock out of DHS would be a great participant on that as well. And let's let people ask those type questions to see if we can prioritize what trainings folks think we need and for what reasons, and then see. I attended some of the, I was exposed to nerve gas and some of that other stuff down at Anniston and all of that, and eventually we became hazmat techs and understood a lot of that. Even on Ebola teams like Wesley Bishop put together down there at A&M. So, you know, where those trainings can go and how they're needed is something I think we could do a forum on maybe on a monthly call, prep everybody, get them ready for it, and even let them propose ahead of time some of their suggestions so we wouldn't walk into it cold turkey, and we could do some real good.
Yeah, and as Jimmy talked about, we've recently met with DHS, and we're really looking at adding additional topics to the next summit in 2024 about food protection, and maybe the agro-terrorism piece comes alive again. So if that's of interest, definitely make sure you guys let us know. I know we're running a little bit long, so I'm not going to keep any longer. Jimmy, great job today. Thank you for all of this information. And if you guys need anything, you can always email us at info@nasaep.com. Otherwise, we will catch you guys next month. Have a great day.